Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'd like to call the January 26th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission to order. It is currently 6:31 p.m. Tonight's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The Planning Policy Commission is in person, but staff or members of the public may be attending virtually or in person. Stephen, the numbers are a little bit shakier tonight, but I think we still have a quorum.
Chair voice, that's correct.
Excellent. And since we're talking about attendance, I would like just to inform everyone that one of our commissioners has had to resign due to some familial obligations. So Commissioner Longoria will no longer be with us. We wish her well. We're going to begin this evening with public comment, and the guidelines, they never change. Comments at tonight's meeting may be made in person or virtually. We've got some guidelines, but Jared, do we have anyone that's signed up to speak tonight?
No one has signed up in person tonight, but is there anybody in the room that would like to speak?
Okay.
We do have one.
Excellent. So we'll still go over the guidelines. So for all those who would like to speak during public comments, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking, and if you are attending virtually by computer or by phone and would like to speak during public comments, in addition to the above, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking, and if you're having any technical issues, try to join the meeting using a different device, such as a smartphone or tablet. Please use the call-in information in the meeting invite to call into the meeting if you'd like to do so virtually. One thing I will mention is right now is reserved for general public comments. So these, if you want to get your Title 18 and Shoreline Master Program comments on the record, we will be doing that a little later this evening during the public hearing. Public comments are an important part of the process. We take them seriously. They're factored into the decisions that we make. We do ask that you please keep your public comments to 5 minutes or less. So, all right. Yeah, I think we're ready. Okay. Any other general public comments? Going once, going twice? Nothing virtually?
Sold.
Perfect. All right, the next item on the agenda is the public hearing. This is the Title 18 code update as well as the Shoreline Master Program updates. We're going to hold the second of 3 public meetings tonight. We held the first one last Thursday, and staff will be presenting and PPC will be deliberating policy questions for parts 5 through 8 this evening, although public hearing comments can be made on any part of the Title 18 update as well as the Shoreline Master Program. Process-wise, we will ask the staff to please make a presentation this evening, and we're going to follow what we did last Thursday. After their presentation, we'll have some clarifying comments from the commissioners. Then we will have the public hearing comments. After that, we will close the public hearing and then move on to deliberations with the commissioners. So, I think now we want to open the public hearing. And we will open it at 6:35 p.m. I believe now we're going to turn it over to staff to hear the presentation on parts 5 through 8.
Good evening, commissioners and members of the community here. I am going to try and share my screen. Just a second. It says I'm already in the event. Join again. I had to join again, guys. Okay, let's hope this works. To share, I'm unable to share at this point. Maybe in the meeting twice. I may be. Okay, let's. There you go. All right. So good evening again. This is our second day, our second public hearing date. We had the first one on January 9th, but we've had many, many meetings on these topics. So today we're officially holding a second public hearing on the consolidated draft of Title 18 and Shoreline Master Program update. The process, like Chair Voice explained, we open the public hearing, there's a staff presentation, clarifying questions from the commission, public comment on the items for the public hearing. We close the public hearing and then the commission will deliberate. So today we're covering part 5 through 8 of the Title 18. So part 5 is the specified use standards. In here we have accessory and temporary uses such as mobile uses and food trucks that we previously discussed. This also, part 5 also includes affordable housing standards, where we've done some cleanup, coordinated with ARCH and made some consistency type of changes. No policy changes made under that chapter. Same thing with the wireless communication facilities. We've aligned it with the FCC regulations, added some graphics and to help illustrate and more housekeeping kind of changes there. Part 6 includes a lot of things. It's the development standards that apply. So last time we covered the zoning, which sort of sets the stage and the basis. Here in part 6, we have urban design and site planning, building design standards, parking, landscaping, community and amenity spaces. And so we've highlighted a policy question for you all to discuss under the amenity spaces. Outdoor lighting is a separate chapter, as well as signs. Then part 7 includes the neighborhood overlays. So these are regulations that are so unique to certain parts of Issaquah that they have been maintained to maintain the neighborhood character of these areas. So this is for Old Town, Central Issaquah, Issaquah Highlands, and Tallis. Then part 8 comprises of a lot of things, and I'll quickly go through them. A lot of goals and outcomes chart that the council had established for this code update relate to part 8 as well. So in here is the SEPA environmental policy chapter, where we increase the thresholds to 10 units or 10,000 square feet for projects that have to go through environmental, they have to fill out the SEPA checklist and go through an additional layer of process. So SEPA, for those of you that joined this conversation later, is the state law, and that establishes some of these flexible thresholds. The city had them pretty low at 4 square feet or 4,000, and so we've increased them and still be aligned with state law. State law actually allows a lot more than 10 and 10,000, but based on previous discussions, that's where the direction from Planning and Policy Commission was. We've updated the public notice standards as well. Under the critical areas code, there are some procedural changes. We had some exemptions that we've now aligned with the state law. And then I think we discussed the process for public agency and utility exemptions. We've added more criteria to it, but whether it needs to be level 1 and level 2 was discussed at the last meeting. The critical area studies. So these are technical reports that, whether it's a wetland biologist or a geotech engineer that prepares these studies, and then the city is a consultant team usually that has the subject matter expert on them, ensures that they are in compliance with the city. So a lot of work occurred on these areas to provide clarity and really to avoid those debates on what needs to be in the study and how and all that. So that's in your packet. There was discussion about reasonable use exception. So we've cleaned up the criteria there, which is if there's a property that's completely encumbered with critical areas, we have to go through a process where we don't take away all development rights for that property. So there has to be a reasonable use evaluation, and which is a public hearing process to let some development occur on that property. And then there was some quirkiness and weirdness with how the density was calculated, so we've all cleaned that up. It wasn't very heavily used section, but it did add a lot of confusion. For the wetlands, the buffers are now aligned with Department of Ecology's best available science. They have gone up slightly, but mostly it's based on habitat score, not just, so there's a whole methodology, and there's a significant increase. At the time we shared, we're aligned with our peer cities. Our code just had not been updated to reflect some of those things. The buffer reductions and buffer averaging is no longer an option, which is consistent with the guidance from ecology. Stormwater facilities such as underground vaults, you can't plant trees and things over it, so you cannot have those in the wetland buffer either. Streams, our definitions were not aligned with Fish and Wildlife and the state regulations, so that has been done. The classification is per Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. During the first round of review, we heard that we needed to look at fish-bearing streams and the buffers, whether that met the best available science, if we kept them at 100 feet. We did that, and those are going up with this update to 150 feet. Buffer reduction and averaging no longer an option. If you have a culvert and you're building a road over it, or that's part of your development project, those culverts need to be replaced to be fish friendly. We have an overlay of fish and wildlife conservation areas. There is some discussion about how does this interplay with the streams and the wetlands. In one draft, we had the streams under this. However, wetlands were not, so now we have a wetland section, a stream section, and a fish and wildlife conservation areas. So you have to show how you're in compliance with all of them. Critical aquifer recharge areas. So the city had performed a hydrogeologic study in 2019, and our existing code had 3 designations, but there were 4 designations recommended by that study. So we have updated our code to reflect what we learned from that larger undertaking that the city did. And part of the update also included some land uses and businesses that can have a detrimental effect to the drinking water supply. And you all have received a comment letter today, and we can discuss more about it as we get to that topic. But the intent of the prohibited land uses list is to not allow new uses that we know could have detrimental effect. It's not our intent to unduly restrict some of the things for existing businesses that are in existence. And so there's some discussion to be had on that. New standards for temporary dewatering and underground construction have been added. We also had comments from Department of Health and Sammamish Water Plateau, and we've incorporated those. The geological hazardous areas is, there's a lot of area in Issaquah that falls under that category, and this area is more for protection of public safety and others, as opposed to some of the wetland and stream, which is more ecological benefits. And we have our consultant online today, so and we have a policy question related to steep slopes. So if you want to get into more detail, we can do that. But in short, the new regulations were added for coal mine. There's a setback for coal mines now. There was a lot of debate about peat settlement prone critical areas. Those have been included in this draft. And then mitigation of landslides, seismic coal mine hazards, a lot of discussion and updates in very technical terms. Buffer reductions from steep slopes is the item that we have for policy discussion today. There was a perception that, we have a 50-foot buffer, that the city has always granted a 10-foot buffer reduction, but it's based off of the safety considerations of geological reports. So we've laid out some options for you to debate. Shoreline Master Program. So this is something that the city undertook as an update a couple of years ago, where council asked us to include some more additional updates. So common line setback, where if your neighbors had a certain setback, you could make an argument that you would get the same thing. And there was a concern that that was too close to the lake and it didn't really meet the best available science. And so we looked at that. We actually had our consultant do GIS study, and that, eliminating that is not going to be an impact on any property owner significantly. So that has been eliminated as requested by council in the past. Shoreline buffer reduction incentive. So there's an incentive that you could go build it closer to the lake if you remove your bulkhead. Nobody really took on that incentive. And it's really not the best practice. So that has been removed, and there's a requirement that if you do a new development, you have to build a new bulkhead that is more ecologically, meets those guidelines. There are new dock lighting standards, those have been added. And then lastly, the Shoreline Master Program has an appendix to the Critical Areas Code. So the new Critical Area Code would be adopted with the SMP. Update. There are the other thing with this Shoreline Master Program that you heard from Department of Ecology representative last time. You will make a recommendation to council. Council will approve it, but the final effect that it can go in is after Department of Ecology approves it. So they will have to review and approve everything related to SMP. A transfer of development rights. Some of the highlights of the changes we've made are forested hillsides are now eligible as sending sites. So the basic concept here is you save open space here, but you can give those development rights to someone else in addition to what's already allowed under zoning for the receiving site. So you get more density in your receiving site, but you're able to preserve open space somewhere else. And so we've added, you can be considered a sending site if you are a forested hillside. The density calculations where you got a little bit of bonus for being in a critical area, we've maintained it in this chapter. It's the purpose is to incentivize preservation of those areas that probably aren't suited for development. TDR certification process levels. These are currently set up as if you want a certification, you're a level 1. So if someone has a sending site already showing on the map and they'll say, how many units are we certified for? They can apply for a level 1 decision, and we would do the math calculation and tell them how many TDR units you can sell. The receiving site that's actually going to get the additional density, there are 3 different options. They can go more height, impervious, more impervious surface, and one other thing. So there's a menu of options they can choose from, and the calculation that happens for that is a level 2 path. However, if you want to change the map, there are some inconsistencies between the map and the text that we've cleaned up. The map showed some sending sites, but the text said if you're zoned this, you're not allowed as a sending site. So that has been fixed in this draft. However, amending the map is still a level 5 decision. Upon further conversations, we've learned that perhaps a sending site should be a lower standard, but that's a separate conversation. We'll continue to review that and get back to you on that. We've added some TDR bank approved activities and things that already existed in the code, but we've made that more clear of how the costs are determined, how the exchange of funds happens, what's the timing of the payment and such. Landmarks, this is really, we've adopted King County Landmark Preservation Code instead of having it hardwired into our code, and then King County's code becomes a little off. So that's the main thing that's changed there. Forested hillside preservation. This is a brand new chapter. This is one of the mandate, the goals that council had for this update. So we've created some design standards. If you're building on a hillside, grading, how are you getting your street access? There's some measurement and mapping section, and there's some compliance options. So there's some flexibility built into this, and this is one of the deviations permitted. So now that's sort of the summary or highlight at a very high level of part 5 through 8. There's a lot to unpack for at least the new members, but we kept it at that level for you. So at the beginning, we had 6 policy questions that we had teased out of this update that perhaps were things you wanted to discuss, and or had asked us to go back in the first round and come back with more information. So we discussed the first 3 at the last meeting. This one is outdoor amenity spaces. So currently, the city has 48 square feet per unit as the minimum outdoor amenity space required for residential development. So some of the options we've laid out for you were, and I think the existing code, you could put a balcony that is 6 by 8 and still comply with the 48 square feet because it's an outdoor space. So we heard during the first round of comments that seems not to meet the mark for what Issaquah community desires or is aligned with our comp plan. So we've looked at our peer cities, we shared all that research, and that's true. Our standards were much lower than some of our peer cities. So the options were to keep it at 48. Option 2 is to increase it to 100 square feet. That is administration's recommendation. Or we can go up to 200 square feet. And in one of your memos, we laid out some pros and cons. But this is what we have in the draft code right now. So residential 5+ units is 100 square feet. 22+ units, you have 100 per unit, but you also have 400 common amenity area for just larger projects. And then for Talus and Highlands, that's the work that was done with the replacement regulations. The standard is already in the code of 250 square feet, so we've maintained that and carried that forward. Next policy question that we have is steep slope buffers. Should the city adopt a different policy regarding steep slope buffers? So we've laid out 4 options for you all to consider. The first one, which is in the proposed draft and is administration's recommendation, is to keep the 50-foot standard buffer, which can be reduced up to, to a minimum of 10 feet with the peer review, but the peer review actually determines the exact buffer based on very specific site conditions. Option 2 that we've laid out is, the buffers are based on slope height. The problem here is slope topography is one, the height is one criteria, but the types of soil, the amount of water, hydrology, the geology of the site doesn't get taken into consideration here. We developed a third option with our consultant team where we took the slope geology. You took all those 3 things. The problem here is you still need geotech peer review to determine if the characteristics of the geology are correct. So you can forego the actual assessment on site. Option 4 was developed just for policy consideration. It's similar to 1, but if you all feel that there really needs to be a more clamping of the buffer reduction, then perhaps the buffer reduction piece is limited to 50% of the slope height. And we'll get into more details about this, but I've included some graphics here for your consideration. These were in your packet I believe on the January 12th agenda packet. So just to get a little bit, everyone on the same page here. So slope height is from the toe to the top, a perpendicular distance. So in this, you see this H that's labeled there. So under this option 2, you could have from the crest of the slope, which is, you would have half of the height. From the toe of the slope, you would have 0.7 of the height difference, and from the sides of the slope, you would have 0.2 H. So this table here kind of shows you how the different buffers would work. We can pick one, for instance, if you have a slope height of 60 feet, then from the crest, you would have a 30-foot buffer. From the toe, you have a 42-foot buffer. From the side, you would have 12-foot buffer. And under your option 3, it's this table that gets into the slope material. There's 5 or 6 kind, glacier till to sedimentary bedrock, and then you have these different variations based on the crest, toe, or side. So that's question 5. Question 6 came from the code testing provisions that the critical area code for homeowners needed some more vetting. We have included a question for you, and I think we heard last time that we need to break it down a little bit. So this is our attempt at maybe perhaps breaking it down. But the question really was, are there any additional incentives or flexibilities for small home renovation projects, that aren't detrimental to wetland and stream buffer, but can be a huge cost burden to do simple additions. So this is complex, so I'll try my best to kind of walk you through what's in the code. So we have a critical area studies section, which says the director can waive the requirement for a critical area study related to an existing single-family home or lot if it's one of these, if it's all 4 of these. There is no alteration of the critical areas or required buffers, and the proposal will not affect the critical area in a manner that's contrary to what the city's goals are. The minimum standards required by this chapter are met, and a critical area study was prepared and previously for a development for that home, and it identified, so there's no point in spending more money on doing a study. Then we have a section in the code that deals about non-conforming structures. So here, the changes to existing legal non-conforming structures that are within a wetland or a stream buffer, an alteration or an expansion of a non-conforming development is allowed. This is not just for single family, it's for everyone. An expansion is allowed outside of the required buffer. You can expand them vertically to add more stories, or the building expansion over existing impervious surface is allowed, as long as you're not going closer to the wetland or the stream, and the buffer so if it's, however, if this expansion is more than 500 square feet, you have to do buffer enhancements. So that's how non-conforming structures in wetlands or stream buffers are created. The disconnect here was under number 3, you can expand into if you already have a patio, you can enclose it in your house, example, but the critical area study exemption didn't say that you didn't, it didn't meet that. So you still had to do a critical area study in order to enclose a patio. So given that, that's our understanding of the issues that came during the testing. We've laid out a couple of options, and we can develop code language based on the direction you all give us. So under option 1, we would keep the waivers from the critical area. There are existing waivers that I just talked about. There's the non-conforming chapter, and the only thing here we would do is we would make it explicitly clear that if there's an existing impervious surface for single-family expansions, you don't need to do a critical area study, that you can enclose it. Under option 2, if you want to go beyond that, we could look at, how much flexibility do you want to give to a single-family homeowner? Do you want to allow expansions, up to 100 square feet, 10 by 10, 500, roughly 25 by 20 square feet along a building edge? So if you already have a house, can you expand along the edge? Or if the stream is here, and can you expand it on the other side of the house? So there's already a house between the stream and the wetland. Can you do an expansion on the other side? We've attempted to say, well, we would allow it if it's only in the outer 25% of the required buffer, and then you actually enhance how much you impacted somewhere else on your property, as long as no significant trees were removed. So we would put some caveats on it. I think given where we are, we still recommend option 1 here. Some of the reasons we're going with the option 2 potentially could be, without an annual monitoring report requirement and others, you could get degradation of your buffers if the homeowner doesn't maintain, doesn't plant, doesn't water over time. Will it really be a useful exercise? But we can further develop it if you think that's the way we need to go. So that's all our policy questions and our discussion. The purpose tonight is to hear from the public in your discussion, so I will stop here.
Thank you, Director Dhaliwal. All right, this worked really well last week, so I think what I'd like to do, Minnie, is have you start with part 5. We'll get the clarifying question for part 5, part 6, part 7, part 8, turn it over to public hearing, and then when we deliberate, we'll have you guide us, and we'll just start with the public, the questions that you have, and then towards the end, we'll just kind of have a general discussion about what we just talked about. So I think we'll start with just part 5 and see who has questions regarding part 5. And if you guys wouldn't mind doing, you guys were so wonderful last week, so just let me know. I'll call your guys' names so we make sure to get it on the record, and we'll start there. Hey, Tim. Any questions as far as part 5? Nothing. Okay.
Actually, can I jump in? Would you
Commissioner
mind
Kennedy.
putting the policy questions up on the screen as we go through them? That'd be great.
Please. Commissioner, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Bader. It only works if I'm paying attention,
I
right?
just have a clarifying question on what we're asking clarifying questions on. Are we asking about the policy questions or the parts?
I think the parts. So you guys don't have, right now, just go ahead and ask any questions you have as far as part 5. What would be helpful, Minnie? Exactly. That
Okay.
screen would be helpful. Specified use standards. And I'll start. I have a couple since we'll let our commissioners gather their thoughts. So I didn't write down all the applicable actual code. I just wrote down the page. So on page 205 of 946, it talks about a deviation for senior housing can be sought for disabled and low-income persons. My question is, are we talking about senior living having a mix of to me that seems a little odd because senior living is towards 55 and older. We're talking about people of a different generation being part of these projects, these developments.
I will need to pull up that particular section. I think we just carried forward that existing code language for that, but I do want to answer your question. Do you have that handy, Christian? What was the page number?
205 of 946.
200 and what?
5.
5. Okay, let me see if I can pull it up here. Are you from your agenda packet?
Yes.
So I can pull it up on the screen if that's useful for anyone else. So this is under commercial, retail, and mixed-use standards. I'm still not getting to, do you have a section, the section number by any chance? No.
I didn't bring the massive tome with me,
Sorry.
unfortunately, so I just wrote down page numbers. It was 205 of 946 of the large binder that was given to us.
Oh, of the binder, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Like I said, I made a mistake. I should have got the, it was the senior living, senior standards. I'll have to become a little bit better prepared.
Let's do a search. Any luck?
So Commissioner.
Yeah, I think I
Altamore
found it
has
too.
found-
So, Senior Housing Standards 18.500.060, under the purpose and intent section, it says provide incentives through parking requirement reductions and density bonus provisions to develop housing opportunities for persons 55 years or older in a responsive and appropriate manner. Regulate the bulk height and spacing to provide adequate lighting, blah, blah, blah. So then I think it goes into, you're talking about the deviation.
Correct.
So under D, it talks about the deviation may be sought to allow occupancy of housing developed using senior housing standards by persons with special housing needs other than seniors, such as disabled or low-income persons, per the approval criteria allowed deviations in this chapter.
So you're going to have to bear with me because that's how all my questions are written this evening. But no, that was the question. That's my concern. I mean, generally, senior housing, I mean, is there any issue with having a generational difference? I mean, that's, I think, the point that I'm getting at. The idea is we're going to have people of all different ages, possibly, again, low income, living with a bunch of seniors. That strikes me as odd.
Yeah, I think my read of this is it's extending the senior housing to special housing needs other than seniors. And so having some of these provisions also apply to those other categories that it's listed, but I would have to get back to you on. I think this is something that we've carried forward from our existing code. I don't know if who else is online, Kristen or Valerie, who worked on this, if they have any more background. Stephen, do you know? Okay. We'll get back to you on this one.
Okay. Bought you guys some time. Work with me. Any other clarifying questions as far as Part 5? I have a few more, but they're all going to go like that. Vice Chair Bader.
Just a question to make sure I'm asking this at the right time. Is the outdoor amenity space, what part is that in? So I ask my question on that at the right time.
I'm sorry?
The outdoor amenity space policy question, what part does that
Part
apply?
6.
Part 6, okay, I'll hold that.
Okay, maybe I can do this in a more general sense. All right, so page 255 of 946, at the bottom, I'm interested how we got the numbers for the general affordable housing section. And again, these are rough notes, I don't have the tome, but I'm just wondering if we got these from Arch or a comparative city.
Yeah, I would have to defer to Kristen on this one.
Okay.
Is she online, Stephen?
I think Kristen's off.
Okay. So we'll come back to that when Kristen joins us.
Okay. .255 of 946. All right, then I have one final one. I think I'll leave you alone till part 6. Regarding the WCFs, this is on page 239 of 254. I thought we did have some protections for views and vistas, but I didn't see any language for that. I did see in the permitted use table on page 249 of 946, table 18.512.100.a. But can you remind me what is a conditional allowable reason to obstruct a view or vista with the WCF?
Good question. Let me pull up the wireless code here. Can you repeat the table number you had?
18.512.100.a.
So it's the citing. So these are just general standards. So macro wireless communication facilities location. But you were talking about the view protections, right?
Correct.
Let me pull it up on the screen so we can look at it together. Okay, so in here is this section on the citing. It's talking about locating, so under A is for the macro, so the larger towers and such. It establishes it's within 1,000 feet, has denied that they can't co-locate non-residential zones located in the setback, what's allowed with conditions, and I think you're saying when blocking natural vistas.
Correct. That was the
Okay.
only language I saw about the WCF that had anything to do with blocking views and vistas. It says allowed with conditions. So my question is, what kind of conditions would make that allowable?
Yeah, I think that under the view corridor preservation, we have that listed as one of the deviations that you can request for. So let me pull that out. So this is saying that just because it's a good question. I don't think that particular section has anything related to the deviations. But there's this other section. So 18600 has a preservation of view corridor is piece. So let's go to that one. Let me share my screen again. So in here to seek a deviation from views and vistas standard, the applicant must provide a view shed study to assess the impact. And then it goes on to say, if the views will not be altered or impacted, no further action is required. The deviation may be approved. If they will be impacted, may be approved if it uses one of the increasing distance between high-rise building towers, retaining or creating new view corridors, or strategic placement. So I don't think it gets at the tower, but there would be some sort of an assessment needed to say, have you minimized the change in the view corridor? You know, if you can locate it in a place where it meets your objectives, however, it maintains some, if it's at the end of a street and you have a direct view to something, then perhaps. The view corridor assessment is on the whiteboard. I think we need to do a little bit more analysis. Not sure what. So, apologize for that. But good question that I think having that in the table that you can approve with condition and macro, that there needs to be some link between the criteria for that particular section for wireless communication facilities. So we can look further into that and propose some amendments.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think Christian has something more to add.
I just wanted to add that the way in which a wireless carrier will step through the process, they'll look at, they've got to prove that there's nothing within 1,000 feet of where they want to go, and show that there's, it's not possible, and they're going to show, where their lack of coverage is. So they're going to provide their analysis. I can't recall the name of that study, but why they need that tower in that one location, and that it's not allowed within 1,000 feet around it, and we would seek that shifting to be in a location that is outside of a vista or a view corridor. But if they've got the evidence to show that this is going to provide the service that the community is needing from a wireless carrier, then we'll step through that process and seek those conditions out through what Minnie mentioned.
No, I appreciate that, Christian. We had that conversation on wireless and small cells, and it feels like ages ago. And I don't remember all of it. Like I said, this is me being punished for going through 500 pages and writing down things in shorthand. So everyone's going to have to bear with me a little bit tonight, but that is how I wrote everything out. Right. So I do appreciate it. Like I said, that's what I noticed. And I appreciate Minnie doubling back and explaining that. So that takes care of my questions for part 5.
Yeah, we do have Kristen online to answer your affordable housing question.
All right.
If you don't mind repeating for her.
No, not at all. Hi, Kristen. So on page 255 of 946, at the bottom, I'm just wondering how we got these particular numbers for affordable housing. I'm just wondering if they were provided by Arch, were these provided by a comparative city? Just wondering how we got these numbers.
there. So I'm trying to catch up. I only have one screen. What is the number? It's 18514?
Yes.
Do you know?
No, I don't.
What are the, sorry, I'm still trying to get there.
So I pulled it up on the screen. I think if you all can
Thank
see
you,
it.
Minnie.
Is there,
Okay.
do you see this? You're talking about some numbers.
Correct.
So are they under 514020? It was the section?
Like I said, unfortunately.
No, Commissioner.
At the bottom of that page, there is the piece on square footage. Could that be the numbers that you were talking about?
Like I said, I'm a little lost without my tome.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the square footage of affordable housing units within a development with
There it is.
affordable
It is the
units.
square footage.
No market rate in general must be no less than 500 square feet for studio unit, 600 for one bedroom, and 800 for two bedroom, and 1,000 for three bedroom. Does that ring? Okay.
Correct.
And then it says the director has the discretion to approve proposal for smaller units based on criteria that the rooms within the units provide adequate space for intended residential use and the affordability level is decreased from what is required by the code. So the numbers of 500, 600, and 800, and 1,000
Correct.
for
And
a
I'm-
typical.
And I'm
yeah.
wondering where we got those numbers. So I'm wondering if the comparative city, were they provided by Arch? I'm just wondering where city got these numbers.
Yes, we worked with, this is Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner, and we did work with Arch on those numbers and they're comparable to other cities. In fact, in most cases, I think they're exactly the same.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Yeah, you better believe I won't forget my book next week. All right, any further questions? Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, just a quick question. I think I've asked this before, but it reads under the required affordable housing, so 18514-070. It has the inclusionary zoning just in central Issaquah. It's my understanding though, right, that we'll look to potentially expand outside that in the housing kind of grant conversations?
Yes, that is part of our housing action plan implementation grant that we received. And it's part of our housing strategy is to expand inclusionary zoning. And we are working with consultants right now about how to do that.
Great.
And where.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thanks.
Any further clarifying questions on part 5? All right, I think we go to part 6.
So part 6 includes all of these things: urban design, site planning, building design, parking, landscaping, outdoor spaces, lighting, signs.
Vice Chair Bader.
Thanks. I have a question on the outdoor amenity space and the purpose of that. Is that for use of residents within that development, or is there some intended public benefit of that outdoor space?
Yeah, so I think for residential developments, that is the intent for the folks living in that development. There are some plazas and other kind of requirements for commercial, so there would be a public space for those. And then that chapter also includes the trail connections, so if you have to build a road along the street frontage, Mountain Sign Greenway Trust or some trail connection, that would be a public connection.
Commissioner Esamwede.
Yeah, I just had one question regarding parking there. I don't have the exact number for the page, but I read it in a piece where it said the vision for parking is for today, with possible conversion in the future per se. So just an elaboration on that in part 6 on the vision for parking within Issaquah.
For an open space section, do you think?
Yeah, I think it pertains to existing parking now, or actually for development, basically. How we would essentially, from what I see, the intent was more so to limit parking for, I guess you could say, like vehicles, gas vehicles, and promote other forms of transportation per se.
Let's see if we can figure out which section that might be in.
The essence, I believe, was to promote other modes of transportation that may reduce the parking requirements within the city.
But you think it was in the community and amenity spaces chapter?
I believe what I can do, I can dig in and probably send an email to get
Sure.
more clarification.
Yeah.
Any other clarifying questions as far as part 6? All right, I'm looking at my notes, and you know what's funny? As they continue, I'm starting to note like the tables. So I think what happened is just the amount of homework scared me. So I was just trying to burn through them with shorthand.
It's not a small task, so
No,
we really appreciate all of you spending your personal time going through a very complex document.
But I
So-
think as I started burning through it, I got more comfortable, I could slow down. So this is the last one that's going to be a little odd, but page 370 of 707, does that help a little bit more if we're actually going through the draft code? So page 370 of 707, there's new language based on the approach of through block passages. So the question is, I believe it mentions there's a restriction if it's a private property, right? So technically, it doesn't need to be used for public use. So if there's a trail that abuts to a private residential, and it goes through, and it's not technically for public use, what does that do for the city's green necklace?
Can you repeat that? So you have a property and there's a trail that's adjacent to that property, but not on the property?
Right, it just, the wording, it describes it going through, right, it goes through a private property where it's restricted to public use, but residents, maybe like a multifamily. All right, so now it's restricted to those people in the multifamily development. How does that work for the city's green necklace? Right, I mean, do people just stop where that, I mean, for example, and let's just say you're going through the Vale, or you're going through, what's next to the Vale?
Atlas.
Atlas, right? And the city's green necklace is going through it, but they have a fence, and the trail is only in that part of it. I mean, is that what it's stating there? That's my question.
And this is 370, page number 370?
Correct.
I'll
then I
share
promise
my
my question-
screen.
My questions get better after this.
I will pull it up, so you can,
Yeah,
It looks like you're 4A number 2.
could be.
Because it says, for residential uses, the trail is not required to be open to the public, but it must be easily accessible for all residents.
Thank you, Commissioner Altamore,
You are welcome.
with the save.
I'm not sharing. 369, okay. So, 18608-050, is that the section we're looking at? Someone said that, that's page 360.
Yes, Minnie, that's the section. Go to 4A.
Takes a village.
So the intent is this section establishes additional development requirements for sites located adjacent to Green Necklace amenities. B shows the map of city-owned parks, open spaces, and trails that form the Green Necklace. And we're saying that the map may be updated as the city purchases additional, areas or anything like that.
It's a subsection C, 4A.
Under C, it talks about a site that meets the description for more than one of the following locations must meet the development requirements for each applicable location. Any site sharing a property boundary with a city-owned park or open space. C1? C4, okay. Any site abutting city-owned trail, including those shown. Site abutting city-owned trails, the development must provide a trail connecting to the development site to the park.
It's right there, mini 4A2.
Okay,
For residential uses, the trail is not required to be open to the public, but it must be easily accessible for all residents. So that's my question, is does the Green Necklace just have gaps in it where it just stops?
Yeah, this is a section that we went back and forth with the Parks Department as well and others, and so I think what this is getting at is, I think you have to look at it from the perspective of, yeah, Stephen seems to have figured that one out, so.
Stephen Bedell, Long Range Planning Manager. So the intention with the language is basically you have the core network for the Green Necklace. What this is requiring, or what this section is requiring, is any development adjacent to it is creating basically a connection to it for that development. Not necessarily as pass-through, but for the development itself.
Got it. Well, thank you. That was very helpful, Stephen. Thank you. That's it for me. All right, I believe we can move on to clarifying questions for part 7. Neighborhood overlays. Any questions concerning neighborhood overlays?
So Old Town is 18,700, Central is 702, Highlands is 706, and Talus is 708. So those are the 4 chapters.
Right, I mean, a lot of this section was basically lifted and adapted, so there's not a lot of new stuff here. All right, going once, going twice. All right, we'll see if we get any more for environment, part 8. All right, here's a general question, Chair Voice. Threshold determination. I was able to do my own. I know you guys refer to it as far as going to SEPA and things like that, but could you give a little bit more context as far as the process?
For SEPA?
Right, just as far as the DNS. I mean, I get it. I just,
Sure.
it's a little bit convoluted, and again, I know you can't write basically SEPA into the code, but it took me a little while to find it. Like I said, it breaks it down. When I actually looked at the WAC, I mean, it's quite convoluted, and then you go to the SEPA website, it's easier to understand. But as far as the process.
Sure. So State Environmental Policy Act was initiated in 1970s when cities did not have a lot of regulations, to protect critical areas or an impact and things. It's a tool in addition to the development regulations that the city has. So things like that may fall through the cracks. SEPA can be used as a, there's this impact, it needs to be mitigated. And SEPA can be used as a tool for those mitigation assessments. So there are different levels of determination depending on the impact that might come through. So for a project of any scale, first test is whether it needs to go through SEPA or not. Is it exempt or not exempt? And that level, that threshold of whether it's exempt, is regulated by the state law of what can be exempted and what can't be. The cities can adopt these flexible thresholds, and that's where we have some flexibility. And we had the lowest, 4 units and 4,000 square feet. It can go up to 60 units and 30,000 square feet, and that's the guidance from, a lot of work was occurred at the state level, and those were the bookends that were set up. So the first test is it exempt or is it not exempt? If it's not exempt, then you start out with, in our city, it would be if you are locating it within central Issaquah, then you could be considered a planned action under the planned action ordinance. So the city did an EIS when they did the central Issaquah plan, looked at this is how much can be built in Issaquah, these are the number of trips that can come in here without an additional impact. So they looked at it more at a sub-area level and identified what mitigations might be needed as development occurs. So it's a little complicated for us because there's the planned action piece that can occur. But outside of that planned action area, you would fill out a checklist, and it's a Department of Ecology's required format for the checklist. You look at impact to the air, the water quality, there are multiple things you evaluate. You say how your project may impact or not. The applicant submits that, the city does a notice, the post site is posted, and we evaluate the checklist to say, yes, there is an impact or no. If there is no impact from that proposed development, we issue a determination of non-significance. But it is appealable. There's a comment period, and then it can be appealed as administratively under our code. If there is an impact, then you can work with an applicant and mitigate that impact, and the city can then can issue a mitigated determination of non-significance. That there might be an impact, but if you do these mitigation things, there's not an impact. If it is truly a huge impact on whatever category of environment, then it can be a determination of significance be issued, and a full EIS should be done for that project. So it's different scales of projects and different review, but majority of them fill out a checklist, and any impacts are regulated through our development, and that's the basis for why it makes sense to raise some of those thresholds and streamline some of the processes.
Thank you. Any other questions as far as the environment? Commissioner Asamoah.
Yeah, this is in regard to the critical aquifer recharge area regarding non-conforming existing properties. And correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't see any area where it talked about limited expansion to existing non-conforming properties within that area.
Sure. So I think if I understand your question correctly, the critical aquifer recharge area, there are 4 classifications compared to 3 from before. So as part of that update is also a list of prohibited land uses. Yeah. So if there is an existing business, that the prohibited land uses, no new business in that list can be located within those designation areas that are designated as CARA 1, 2, and there may be, other prohibitions. If you are an existing business in CARA 1 or 2 and you are on that prohibited list, you can continue to operate. I think one of the comments you received from Lakeside, and they're here today represented so they can speak to their concern with that language, is that it's not explicitly clear for how the non-conforming, that they would become non-conforming, and then the non-conforming chapter would apply. So the non-conforming chapter has multiple thresholds, if you don't meet the setback or you don't meet your parking requirements. So those are things that if you're non-conforming standards, or there's a section about non-conforming uses. So there are prohibitions for non-conforming uses, like if you have not in operation for X amount of years or whatever, then you become a, thing. So I think the tie-in between the prohibited uses list and the non-conforming chapter is the part that's been raised as that there is not not a strong link in terms of clarity of how that would apply.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
would this code talk about, to the point of, if we have that existing property within that CARA area
Yeah.
and that property owner wants to expand, how would that be addressed?
Yeah, we can clarify some language related to that. I think for now, the purpose of CARA regulations is to protect the water
Exactly.
quality, not to limit their ability to expand. However, there may be a gas station that is on that prohibited list used, for instance. They would be allowed to do the maintenance, they would be allowed to replace their, their underground tanks and things. So majority of the pollution prevention is, underground tanks and how can that happen? But does it make sense to allow, 10 additional underground tanks? Probably not a good idea. And I don't think that's a realistic proposal that anyone would propose. But we do want them to be, if they were to expand their building and they are in compliance with zoning, there's no prohibition for that. So it's only for the things that may have a negative impact on the drinking water supply.
So I think the other piece to that is that how would we limit the expansion? Because that area is delineated, that critical recharge area is delineated for a reason, because if there's any leakage or whichever, I know it's protected, but sometimes there's leaks, and it gets into the drinking water, into the groundwater. Is there, I think what you're saying right now, it's not spoken, the language isn't spoken to right now.
It appears to be creating some confusion, so yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll talk through it a little bit more or look at it again.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Esamwede. Any other questions regarding Part 8, Environment? All right, so this one just has kind of caught me. So page 614 of 707, 18.802.190, A3. So the notes are getting better.
I am a little slow, so just give me the page number again, please. Can you repeat the page number?
614
614.
of 707.
Yep.
So I just don't remember discussing this. And this describes a wet season at the discretion of the city. From October to April, I believe is what it said. So how does that work in terms of the permitting process, right? So you're looking for geological hazards. I just sounded interesting. I just wondering if you could speak to that for a minute. How does that work with permits? Like if you are in a geological hazard and you want to see a wet season pass before determining viability, being able to build, we've never talked about it, so that caught my eye.
Sure. We do have Jim Johnson on the line who helped with this. I will defer to them, but I will say this section is really about the mitigation of landslide hazard. So if there has been a landslide, we want to make sure that any mitigation that was done, that it survives a typical wet season. So if you have, and that's defined from October to April in a typical year. But Emily Appleton, our engineering manager, and Jim Johnson are you online to take this one and explain? I can share my screen on which section.
Hi, here.
Hi, I'm Emily Appleton. I manage the engineering department, and we worked closely with Jim Johnson of Golder to develop this code. So I am going to let our expert, Jim Johnson, describe the theory behind that.
Emily, if you could bring up the code language. I think by your description of what you mentioned, I think I understand a little bit of what you're talking about. But if you could bring it up, that would be helpful. I think if I'm correct, it's pertaining to someone who may be proposing a mitigation to stabilize a landslide. And what the code language would say is that their mitigation needs to be shown to be effective by having the mitigation completed and then having the mitigation go through a winter season, a winter wet season. And the reason is that most of the landslides are caused by either direct rainfall infiltration or fluctuations in the groundwater level. So we would want to make sure that that mitigation holds through the winter. So the best test of that mitigation is Mother Nature itself. So that's the idea behind it.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, like I said, just caught my eye. I don't ever recall talking about it, so I was like, huh. Okay, well, that does it for me. Commissioners, any other clarifying questions before we turn it over? All right. Okay, I believe we are now at the public comment period of the public hearing. So I'll just mention this one more time. We do ask everyone, whether they're joining us in person or virtually, to speak clearly and pause frequently. Please state your name when you begin to speak. And if you are speaking virtually, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And if you're having any technical issues, try joining the meeting using a different device such as a smartphone or tablet. You can also use the call-in information into the meeting, in the meeting invite to call in. We do ask that people keep it to 5 minutes or less. So Jared, I guess we can start with the people in the room in case they want to leave, and then we'll go virtual.
Perfect.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for allowing me to speak. My name is Kim Lee, Director of Real Estate Development at Lakeside Industries and Issaquah resident. We submitted a comment letter that's been referred to staff and the commission this afternoon in follow-up to our comments from last week and previous. While our concerns with the CARA regulations and nonconformance remain, perhaps more importantly, we want to convey our shared goal of protecting the city's aquifer and drinking wells. We've been operating in our same Issaquah location for the last 70 years, and in that time, we've taken great measures to ensure a clean operation and preservation of habitat. Again, we work here and we live here. We've planted over 100,000 trees on our property and made a sizable land donation to further city's conservation goals. As written, the CARA regulations would deem our operation, as we understand it, a legal non-conforming use, which would make it challenging, if not impossible, to upgrade our facilities into the future. In our letter, we also noted that there are other possible impacts to residents and businesses because of these CARA changes, beyond just Lakeside. I also want to point out that we have a dedicated land use and environmental department at Lakeside whose job is to ensure not only that we're complying with all the rules and regulations, but they're also challenging us constantly to continue reducing our environmental footprint. We love it here in Issaquah, and we want to stay here. So it's important that the code be written so that we can continue to promote better outcomes for our community and for our environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else in the room like to speak? All right, do we have anyone virtually who would like to speak?
No one has indicated that they would like to speak at this time. We do have one.
All right.
You are now a panelist. You should see the option to unmute, and you have 5 minutes.
Hi, Joanna. Did you still want to speak on public comment tonight? Okay, Joanna, we're going to come back to you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. My name is Joanna Bueller, and I live in Issaquah, and I'm talking for Save Lake Sammamish. You've received a letter from us already, a letter of comment, which came, I believe was delivered to you today. I want to emphasize the need for shoreline buffers, especially on Lake Sammamish. The water quality, Save Lake Sammamish has worked for almost 35 years now on water quality and the water quantity in Lake Sammamish. And I'm particularly concerned about the kokanee and their survival. These are wild native Lake Sammamish kokanee. And one of the things that is impacting them is the temperature as we have the climate change. So that temperature of the water is getting warmer in summers. And the Lake Sammamish, without going into lots of detail, stratifies. And so by the end of summer, the top layer of Lake Sammamish is too warm for salmonids, and that's kokanee or sockeye or any other salmonids, including those traveling to Issaquah hatchery. The lower portion of the water is has no oxygen, so no fish can live down there. So there's the middle of the sandwich, which is exactly the right. It still has, well, it's not exactly the right, but it has sufficient oxygen and is cool enough for the salmonids to survive. As the temperature of the lake goes up, that little middle of the sandwich, that Goldilocks zone, is shrinking, and it becomes squeezing narrower and narrower. So we need to provide more shade on our creeks. We need to provide more shade on our shoreline. And if you look at Google Earth, the Lake Sammamish shoreline is pretty much denuded of vegetation. People have removed all of the natural buffer zone, which they are supposed to have. And so we don't have sufficient vegetation to allow fish, particularly the fry, to forage and to be along the shoreline. This is a real problem, and it's getting worse. The King County did a report in May of 22, released in May 22, and it's the Lake Sammamish Water Quality and Kokanee report. And it documents and shows the evidence of this lack of oxygen and increase in temperature. One of the best things we can do is get more cold water into the lake, and that means shading the creeks, making sure they're shaded all the way down to the lake. And on the shoreline, almost all of the vegetation, particularly the mature trees, have been removed. And what we would hope you could do and make sure, and there is wording to this effect, to deal with the cumulative impact, and in our letter there's specific suggestions, but we need to have people, when they come in for any permit, they need to be required to revegetate the shoreline, and so that, and it should be tied to permits. This is particularly outlined in our letter, but it has real, it sounds, oh, we want a buffer zone here, we want trees, but it has a real life impact, and whether or not we're going to have any salmonids remaining in Lake Sammamish in this watershed is a big question as the lake warms and the water warms. Lake Sammamish is fed only by groundwater, so again, preserving those Kara areas is very, very important in order to have cleaner, cold water flowing in. So that's my plea is for more vegetative cover to help the wildlife and the fish and the survival, ultimately, of a very important resource, which is Lake Sammamish. We don't want to have dead fish and, you know, a eutrophic lake, which is so rich in nutrients that it's just dying, basically. It's choking to death on nutrients. So So thank you very much for considering our comments, and we appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
All right, are there any further public comments?
There is one more public comment. They have raised their hand.
Okay.
I will now make you a panelist, and you should now see the option to unmute, and you will have 5 minutes.
Shockingly, it's Connie Marsh. He doesn't know me well enough to know what CM is. So, yes, agreeing with Joanna, which brings up that we can make all the rules we want, but if people don't follow them and everything goes away, we have to figure out how we actually require them and enforce them. And that's probably a further situation. So onward, 1, wireless towers are allowed in all community facility zones, and this requires city permission to use that land. But that particular decision of yes, no, on whether someone should be able to use public land is strictly administrative in this code. And that needs to have a public opinion. After it gets into after yes, and you say you're going to develop it, then the public can speak. But the public should be able to speak before it's even allowed. And then I made a lot of comments about the community spaces, but they are not in the chart addressing my comments. And so I'm not sure where they disappeared to. And I would like to see them actually out in the public. I don't think that chapter is good to go. It's too confusing and conflicting in both language and description. So if you could do something about that. Trails should not be allowed to mitigate off-site after they intrude in a critical area buffer. That would actually be a buffer reduction. And we keep saying that we are not allowing buffer reductions, yet that is in the code. And so are several other impacts to our buffers, as in utilities, and the director has an ability to reduce the buffer. Yet we keep saying in the summary that we are not allowing any buffer reductions or buffer mitigations. So that's not strictly true. So we need to examine those places where they are being allowed to be impacted and decide whether we should or should not. Now this one is way off your radar, but the banners on Front Street, if you can picture Front Street and their banners, those are only allowed for nonprofits that get money from the city, and then further activities specifically funded by the city after the nonprofits have been funded. But there is no language in the code guiding the use of these banners and saying how it's supposed to look or feel. Right now it says they're supposed to support the feel of Old Town, which I actually have never seen that happen with one of these banners. So I don't know if it's even true that only people who are getting money from the city should be able to use the banners on Front Street. They cost like $500 to put up a banner. So why would that only be for nonprofits funded by the city? I don't know. So also the scheduling of applications for those banners is more than vague. I tried to track it, and it was impossible to track and more than confusing. So that also needs to be adjusted. So I'm going to say a good thing. Having the 150-foot buffers is definitely an upgrade. The new criteria is better. The lack of reduction, for the most part, is better. So I think you've gained a lot of territory in this critical area section. The community space section needs a redo. It's just not functioning. So no one's spoken to that community spaces section. So I don't know what you think about it, but I would appreciate some comment there. Okay, thank you.
All right, Jared. Any other?
We do have 2 call-in users tonight.
Okay.
I am going to go through one of each just to make sure that if they would like to speak, they're given the option to.
Okay.
Call-in user 3, I will go ahead and unmute you. If you do not wish to speak, please refrain or let us know that you would not like to speak. And you are unmuted. Call-in user 3 has not. We'll go to 4. Call-in user 4, you will be unmuted. (206-300). And we have no one else left to speak tonight.
All right, we'll give it 10 seconds unless somebody throws up a hand.
No one else has indicated that they would like to speak.
All right, thank you, Jared. And I do want to thank all 3 of our public commenters this evening, 2 of them who have also written in. I know that we've received their emails as well, so hopefully everyone's read them and it'll be able to help us make a better and even more informed decision. With that said, we will close the public hearing this evening at 8:03 p.m. All right. Commissioners, we are ready to deliberate as far as parts 5 through 8 this evening. And I think we'll have many guide us. We'll bring up with the staff questions, the policy questions, and then at the end we can deliberate on anything you've heard, including the public commentary this evening or anything off topic. But let's start with a guided conversation, and we'll just start with policy question. I believe that was 4, Minnie? Policy question 4.
Correct. Yeah, the first one is related to outdoor amenity space.
All right. Commissioner Altamore.
Thank you. So in looking at the options that have been proposed by the staff, I would like to suggest option 1, but allowing for not allowing balconies to meet that requirement, which is specified from other cities. Option 2, the 100 square feet can be really cost prohibitive for the development of multifamily housing and just feels like too big of a stretch for larger developments. For smaller ones, maybe there could be some criteria or some tiering that could be put in there. But my preference would be to see us keep the 48 feet, but not allow it to be qualified by balconies.
Commissioner Kennedy.
I guess clarification, my recollection when you talked about this policy question was that the option 2, the 100 square feet, is sort of in accordance with comparable cities. Is that correct?
That's correct. We had included with your packet before a peer city research, so in the January 12th agenda packet of what some of the other cities require. And, you know, from that research, Bothell, Kirkland have 200 square feet per unit requirement. And so, but going from 48 to 100 is where we had recommended. And so, yeah, we did look at peer cities and made that recommendation.
Thank you. I think with peer cities at, you know, a much larger amount, that's sort of that happy medium between our current 48 and their use of 200, the 100 makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Commissioner Kennedy. Commissioner Altamore.
So I looked at that as well, and this conversation is actually happening in all of the peer cities as well. And there's a lot of advocacy from housing developers, both on the affordable and the market rate side, to reduce these because they are impacts to development. So it is just something I want us to consider. And that's why I'm saying if we don't stick with the 48, I would rather we look at a tiered system rather than just across the board, a standard 100, because even in the cons in that original policy question packet, it is identified that that can be very prohibitive or very large with a larger development.
Commissioner Patterson.
I'd like to piggyback on that as well. I'm in alignment with what Commissioner Altamora said. I did the most American thing I could think of, which was take the example and compare it to a football field. So 30,000 square feet for a 300 unit, that's literally half a football field at that basically option 2. So if you consider a 300 unit, which is, I think one is going in by the transit center over by Tibbetts in the near future, imagine then on top of their building also having 50 yards of a 50-yard football field of outdoor amenity space. Now, there is, of course, rooftop, I think, is considered an outdoor space, things like that, where you could kind of see it working in some ways. But to your point, it might make sense for a 100 unit to have 100 square feet. That's a more reasonable size. But if you're talking about a 300 unit, where you're having to also accommodate such a huge area of outdoor amenity space, I'm kind of more in line with maybe a tiered approach where we would be able to consider, the size of the property itself or the building that's going there itself, as well as the amenity space.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to Vice Chair Bader?
I guess this is more of a question than a comment of like what actually is outdoor amenity space? Can it be like a grassy area, on the side of a parking lot? Does that count as like outdoor amenity space if it has like a bench on it or something? Or is it like kind of more parky area?
Christian may be able to get you the specifics. I think we define an amenity space outdoor.
Yeah, so it can include, and it can be broken up into multiple areas. So it could be rooftop amenities, it could be ground floor amenities, it could be private community open space that's not open to the public. So it's not just kind of in an example of a 300 unit building with a rooftop amenity as kind of the only space. The idea is that there is ground floor areas. And it's indoor and outdoor, so there are outdoor requirements, there's indoor, so it could be kind of blended with some of those thresholds.
Commissioner Esamwede.
Then and this in a way clarifying a little bit of a question. So you stated that it's indoor and outdoor, these amenity spaces. I believe on a previous session, we were told that in the Highland area, Issaquah Highlands, typically they use 200 to 250 square feet.
Yeah, so that's, we have a requirement in our existing code for new parks, standard of 250 square feet per new unit. So anything going in new, most of those places are already built. But so, for instance, in Tallis, you have existing parkland. But if we were putting in new units in there, you would have to have 250 square feet per unit requirement. So that is already in the code, and we carried that forward. We did not make that change, any change to those regulations.
And then
the central Issaquah is the one that had the 48 square feet, and then the rest of the city, I think, doesn't have one now, or it was deferring to central. So, you had those 5 different codes pointing to each other. And so we've kind of brought them together in one section. But also part of this chapter is, since the code was updated, the city did the park strategic plan update, where is this concept of green necklace that comes into play of having these parks and then these connections between the parks. So, and some policies at the comprehensive plan level of, how much the community values those outdoor spaces and amenities. So that is all that led to our recommendation on this issue.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to lead to about like the public benefit, and if it improves the experience of the Issaquah constituents. Basically, I'm actually for the 100 square feet per unit. Very well, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Esamwede. Vice Chair Bader?
Yeah, I'm for it as well. I think that a balcony serves a very different purpose than a rooftop, than, a playground. And I think to Commissioner Esamwede's point, just about kind of like the sense of community, the quality of living space that we're providing, also support the kind of increase to 100. And I remember on the tiered point, and this might be different than what you're talking about. I remember the first time we talked about this, we had talked a little bit about, should we give like exceptions or allow for less if it's affordable, and we kind of talked about the loss of that sort of space if we did something like that, and that's not what we want to encourage in affordable housing that's being built. And so I support it for the 100 kind of across the board, given that it can be made up of multiple different types of amenity spaces.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bader. Yeah, I'm in agreement with Commissioner Esamwede, Vice Chair Bader, I believe Commissioner Kennedy as well. But yeah, I think 48 is very minimal, and I think 200 might be a little bit too big for our township at this point. There's not a lot of 300 plus buildings that I'm aware of. I think the last one was built along I-90. The place where I live, I think, is 130 units, and it's quite big. So I have no problem going up to 100 square feet. I do think we can do a yes, an up or down, but it wouldn't bother me either. It'd be interesting to see the tiered thing, because again, if you do have buildings that get over to 300 units, maybe we do take a look, but I'm comfortable with option 2 myself. Maybe at this point, and again, because I did bring this. I did bring this agenda. So I'm looking at Mount Lake Terrace, looking at some of our peer cities, Kirkland, Bothell. These are all at 200. I mean, Bellevue's at 800. So we're at 48 right now. I think we can use an upgrade. Do we want, would anyone like to, let's do this. Who's all in favor for option 2 as it stands? All right, so we're going to move on. It was almost a majority. Or no, I'm sorry, it was almost unanimous. So we had one holdout. All right, we'll go to policy question 6.
Number 2 is on the steep slope buffers, and our recommendation is option 1.
Commissioner Esamwede.
I think option 1 gives the developer the flexibility of just moving forward with the proposed code at a 50-foot buffer, and if they would want to reduce that buffer, they would have to be able to show evidence of the site conditions to be able to get to that 10 feet. So I think from an economic standpoint, option 1 would actually be one of the options, the actually only option that I would support on this one.
Thank you, Commissioner Esamwede. Anyone else like to weigh in on policy question 5? Vice Chair Bader.
All right, come up with something. Yeah, I support option 1 too. I think the con is kind of interesting, the public perception con, because presumably staff don't believe that that's the case, that it won't result in similar outcomes, and therefore that'll be overcome, by implementation anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's true, the city has granted these buffer reductions on a pretty regular basis, but those are based on science, those are based on the geotechnical engineers agreeing. So unless you know what went into that decision, you may perceive that, oh, everyone gets this, but it's based on safety factors and other reasons, so.
Yeah, because the others just feel like kind of overcomplicating for the sake of overcomplicating, which I don't think is valuable.
Commissioner Patterson.
I'm in alignment with the 2 commissioners that have spoke. I think last time we brought this up, I did try and advocate for the public perception a little bit to ask about option 4, as that seemed like maybe a middle ground. But I think you did a great job explaining it last time, Director, about that one line there on option 1, which is peer review determines exact buffer based on site conditions. I mean, I think that that's the most fair across the board. I mean, we're checking the safety box. It's pretty clear cut what's available there. 2 and 3 are overcomplicated, and 4 is a little too rigid. So I think 1 gives the best flexibility and checks all the boxes.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to comment on policy question 5? Okay, I'm basically in agreement. I was between 1 and 4, but I think Commissioner Patterson said it pretty well. Number 4 seems a little rigid, and if you're already doing the peer review, it pays for itself, right? So you should have the flexibility that comes with those peer reviews. I mean, that's why we get them. To be quite honest, perception is not a concern of me. I mean, if it's effective policy, it's effective policy. Just because people don't think you did anything, that is not the right reason to be making policy. So I'm in agreement, policy, option 1. All right, so to help lighten the burden for next Thursday, all in favor of option 1, please raise your hand. Unanimous.
Great, thank you. And we can have our consultant who joined us. Thank you, Jim Johnson. You're free to go. We're going to move on to the next topic.
Thank you, Minnie.
So number 6 is this critical area code for homeowners. And we laid out 2 options. And we've morphed them based on some feedback that we needed to kind of explain these a little bit more. So I have them up on the screen if you need me to go through them again. So, I mean, basically under option 1, we're not changing any policy other than clarifying that we would not require a critical area study if you have a patio and you want to enclose it. So if you already have an impervious surface, you're not expanding into the buffer or anything. But, so that's the only thing option 1 would do. Option 2 is changing some policy to allow smaller additions for homeowners and coming up with some criteria for when, how to put some bookends and make sure that it doesn't degrade the environment over the long term.
Thank you. Anyone like to speak to policy question 6? Commissioner Altamore.
Thank you. So under option 2, number 1 says expansion is in the outer 25% of the required buffer. So that means that there would be expansion into the buffer, but there wouldn't be a critical area study?
Yeah, I mean, the intention here is that you're not, if your stream is right there, we're not going to let people go extremely close to it, that it's far away, you have 150-foot, not, this won't even apply to the shoreline stuff, but for wetlands and other things, that as long as it's ways away and you're only, adding a 10-foot addition, and you're going to plant your buffer and you're going to expand your buffer in another area, but close to where your home is, you have a little bit of an impact. It'll be challenging to do that without a critical area study. I think some of that burden would be borne by the city to go verify the boundaries. We would have to do some assessment of our own to make that happen. So it's not the cleanest way to do things, and it could be challenging to implement.
Is it possible to implement option 2 if they are out of the buffer?
Sure.
If it is side or on the other side of the building and they don't go into the buffer?
They can do that now. I mean,
they can. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So under option 1, we could expand that to say, so you're getting at you don't need a critical area study if you are not only expanding on the impervious surface, but you're also expanding outside of the buffer. I think someone will have to make that call that it's clearly outside the buffer.
And without the critical area study?
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Great comment. That helped me too. Commissioner Asamoah.
And that expansion outside of the buffer would still be bound to the requirements for like water quality. Like if you're expanding outside of the critical buffer, but you're changing green area to impervious area, you would still be required to meet the water quality standards.
Correct, yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah, the stormwater regulations they'll have to comply with that, absolutely.
Okay. Very well. Thanks. I'm actually for option 1 per se, with those clarifications from Commissioner Altamore.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to this policy question? Please.
Coming in late as one of the newer commissioners, is there a problem with option 1 that people have identified that we want to try to fix?
Yeah, so this came through the code testing provision. So one of the sites that was selected was a single-family home. And in order to allow the enclosure of a patio or something like that, it was determined that our code says you have to do a critical area study, which costs thousands of dollars. And the end result is we still allow them to enclose the thing. So what purpose did the critical area study solve or provide additional information when the other section already allows you to enclose it?
So option 1 solves that.
Correct. So it's redundant, and we would just clean up the language to make it explicitly clear that enclosure of impervious surface, you don't have to do a critical area study.
Terrific, thank you.
Vice Chair Bader.
Just a clarifying question, I apologize. This might have been covered on the meeting where there were the audio issues, so apologies if I'm repeating questions, but is this applying only to homes that, because we now have a bigger buffer, were like not previously impacted?
No, this would be to anyone.
To anybody?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So if you have a critical area buffer on your property and it's a single-family home, you happen to have an impervious surface, your driveway or your patio, and you want to enclose it, we would not require a critical area study under option 1, and we would make that explicitly clear.
So the way it works in theory, if we don't have exceptions, or that if you have a buffer, it's not just if you want to build inside that buffer, it's if there's any buffer on your property, you would have to have a critical. Okay.
But there are certain exemptions, so this is where we can give folks a waiver from critical area study for single-family homes. If they're not altering the area or the buffer, it's not going to affect in any manner contrary, the minimum standards are met, and actually, hold on. Yeah, so there are 4 of these. No alteration, won't affect the critical area, and the minimum standards are met, and the previous homeowner had done a study, and we would say, okay, well, no point in spending, even though we've now put in a 5-year expiration, I believe, because that's what is a standard practice. Things change over a period of time. So we would, under option 1, we would add an item here to make it clear that for a single-family homeowner, if you're expanding on an existing impervious surface, you can also be granted a waiver or an exemption from doing the study.
Yeah.
I have one thing to kind of build off that, and then I'll go to Commissioner Esmwede. So we're talking a lot about non-conforming uses, and this kind of reminds me of that. If let's say there's a single-family lot, and the buffer has been X for the last, as long as the code has been, now we're upping those buffers. What happens to that property that's been sitting on that critical area? Does that begin to are they grandfathered into that old buffer setbacks, or does it start to encroach on their property now that the code has been updated?
Yeah, so there are special exemptions for wetland and stream buffers in our non-conforming chapter, and we did not change those. If I can quickly find them here, I will bring them up.
Right, I mean, I'm less interested in what the actual buffers were. I'm wondering, for those houses that are sitting next to critical areas, with the code update, are they consistent with the old buffers, or does
No, the new buffers would apply to every property.
So they do start encroaching on their.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's
But
what I wanted.
you have some grandfathered rights to maintain your property and stay and rebuild on the footprint, and in case there's a fire or
Right.
anything like that, you can. So in accident, earthquakes and stuff, you can rebuild.
But the buffer does continue to move towards the house?
Yeah,
Okay.
so you're not grandfathered for buffers. The
Right.
buffers apply to everyone equally.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Commissioner Esamwede.
So to that point, with the new buffers per se, what if you have impervious area within that critical area buffer? Is that possible? And then would they still be able to expand or put a canopy over that impervious area?
Yeah, so I'm going to bring this one up. So let me walk you through this section. Oops. Okay, can you all see this? So this is in the non-conforming chapter, and it talks about changes to existing legal non-conforming structures involving wetland or stream buffers. If it's a new development or redevelopment, you have to comply. So if it was a complete tear down and rebuild, you would need to meet the setbacks and the buffers. Alteration and expansion of existing non-conforming development is allowed outside of the buffer areas. You can expand vertically to add more stories. You can expand over existing impervious surface within the buffer as long as the building expansion doesn't encroach closer towards a wetland or a stream. If it's more than 500, you have to do buffer enhancements. Or 4, if they're damaged or destroyed due to accidents or nature, you may reconstruct the original building footprint.
Okay. No, thank you.
Yeah. And this is existing policy that we haven't changed. It's just carried forward.
All right, any further comment on this particular policy question? So I guess I'll be a little bit of the contrarian. I like the flexibility. I mean, we'll talk about it in a moment, but letting homeowners do more on their property, especially with the safeguards built in, I'm probably never really going to have a problem with that. I understand they're out of critical area, but I would be interested to know if there's any way we can have a better monitoring system. And again, it sounds like it would come from the city, and we're not talking about critical area study. What would you have to say to that, Director Dhaliwal?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we would have to have staff trained in doing wetland delineations and stream buffer delineation. So that would be a certification you know, it takes a lot for someone to know and get to be a wetland biologist and all that. So that would be needed. We would go out to the site, exactly do the things, but then I think the debate would be, well, where's the survey? Usually what happens with the delineations is the biologist goes and flags these things, and then the surveyor comes in and picks it up and draws it on a plan, and you know exactly here's the boundary and here's the buffer. So that could be problematic for us to kind of take on that responsibility. But you know, you could limit it to say you can only expand if there's a wetland and there's a building already here. Then you can only expand on the other side in a limited fashion. I think you can make that call that the buffer is already interrupted, but the addition that you do, that same square footage, you somehow have to replant. We could make the monitoring easier for homeowners by saying, you know, every year send us a photo as opposed to a technical monitoring report to make sure they watered the plants and they're doing well. But again, you know, our experience and Department of Ecology's experience is that those things over time, you know, blackberries take over, and it's a lot of work to maintain those things. So there could be issues with implementation of that from costs and practicality. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. Like I said, I just, And again, I mean, it's not like they're going to be able to build new construction in those areas regardless. I just, again, if they are, if these new codes do, you know, I'm thinking of some, like, you know, whether it's streams or buffers. I mean, I guess this really wouldn't have to do with Lake Sammamish because of the SMP, but it just seems, it seems odd that we would have such a direct impact, especially when they already have guidelines to keep us out of certain areas. I mean, if they encroach it a little bit, plus there's the design of the house. I mean, you can only do additions in, you know, certain areas as far as the structure itself, right? You can't put an addition where a front door is. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I said, I guess before I go further, let me see if I'm outnumbered this time. So, all yays for number 1. Okay, we're not quite there on the yays yet, but let's see if we can get there with a little bit further clarification. Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with 1. I'm trying to figure out 2 and like if they're different. And like the part of 2, so I don't, in theory, don't have a problem if like the because presumably the buffer is going to do its job, right? That's why it's there. And so if the house is outside of the buffer and the expansion is on this side, then it's not going into the buffer, it's not reducing the buffer. I get that it could have impacts, but presumably then the buffer is still maintained. And so
yeah, let me kind of explain that. So I wish a graphic would be really good here. So you have your buffer here, your house is already in the buffer. Mm-hmm. And the buffer extend, you know, your buffer, the entire house could be in the buffer. We may have a situation where the entire thing is in the buffer. So, and the expansion itself will lie within the buffer. If the expansion is outside the buffer, you can do that now under the code. So that's not an issue. The issue would be, do we need a critical area study? And so you could add that, you know, so that's needed in order to determine the impact of that. The example that you had where the addition is outside the buffer, you can do it, that's allowed. Yeah. The question would be, do you need a critical area study for that? If the entire house is in the buffer and the expansion is going to be in the buffer, yeah, then you...
Right, otherwise you're building like an outhouse, right? On the,
correct,
on the
correct.
Yeah. Building up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So really option 2 with, I mean, really option 1, if you're already going to get the critical study, it really, option 2 becomes kind of a moot point. Am I kind of getting that right? I mean,
you could have an option 3 where you just say you could do that and not require, you know, that you allow expansion if you have an interrupted buffer. I think that's the term some cities use. So if your buffer is already interrupted by your house, so between the buffer and your house, you know, it's already interrupted, that you can do the expansions on the other side of your house. So you're not making the buffer, interrupting it even more.
Right, but like you said, under this code already, you can go up and you can go out. You just can't.
You can go out as long as the addition is outside the buffer. So you could allow going out within the buffer because it's already interrupted, because you have a house already there between the buffer and that. So yeah, it gets nuanced and it gets complex, and so that would be a policy change to do that. And
well, if I mean, it is a democracy up here. So how many people are still wishy-washy on 1, 2, and 3 and would like to see the invisible option 3 that we don't get to see right now? Me. And how many people just want to go with option 1? All right, well, it's 3-3. So can we see an invisible number 3? And when we bring that one back, so you got 2 knocked out tonight, but maybe next Thursday we see an option 3 for policy question 6.
Sure, we can work on that.
Because again, if I'm understanding it the way it's written, I'd like to allow the flexibility for the homeowner, especially if they're already encumbered by an intrusive buffer. Again, that to me just seems kind of odd, because again, I don't know the shape of the lot, I don't know the shape of the house. I mean, you can't necessarily just do an addition just I mean, sometimes it has to be projected one way or the other. So that's my feeling on it. 3 washy, 3 steady. So,
But you, and the third option, do you want to kind of do for smaller additions up to 500? Or, you don't want a complete rebuild of a, okay. So still keep that, some smaller addition piece to it in your option 3. Okay.
fair enough. Yeah, Vice Chair Bader.
Sorry, I think this is, to the public, I have 2 newborns at home, and I think it's showing, showing right now in my brain capacity. Just so I'm really clear, so option 1 is kind of like the most strict, so it's only waived if they're building on an existing impervious surface.
Correct.
Option 2 gives them more ability to, again, do a addition or whatever, and so it gives them a little more flexibility than option 1 does.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, you would allow encroachments into the buffer that don't have impervious surface with some restrictions on the, it's already interrupted, it's on the other side, you're not taking down any trees and whatever else you want to add to that list.
Commissioner Altamore.
Sorry, I was settled, but I think what I heard you say before is connected to what you just said, which is that option 1, it's on that current impervious surface, but if you also want to do a greater expansion than that, you have the ability under the what would you call it, not diversions, the
deviations?
The deviations that exist now, which means that if there was a study within the last 5 years, and those other pieces are met, then you can give them, the director can allow that, correct?
Yeah, those 4 criteria, if someone meets those 4 criteria, we can not require a critical area study, but that does not allow you to do any expansion in the buffer area.
In the buffer area, but outside the buffer area you can.
Correct.
And so is the distinction among the 3 of us and the 3 of us inside the buffer area versus outside the buffer area?
I think for me, it's being inside, right? Because I'm seeing these buffers continue to encroach on the house and the project, right? These are going to all be upgraded. It's the same thing, I guess, when we get there. I'm going to want to ask about some of these non-conforming uses. So for me, again, they're being asked to do less and less with their property. And again, not every lot and not every house is situated to have an addition up or in front or on the sides. And I'm just asking for flexibility. Now, if they all have to have a critical areas, now if they can do option 1 or if they can build into the buffer and all it requires is a critical study, then I guess that maybe that's the invisible option 3. I just don't know, but I'd like to see option 3.
Yeah, we can create a couple more options.
But
one with study, one without study, one a limited expansion in an interrupted buffer.
Right,
So
because
I
we're
think
not talking about new construction. We're talking about existing homes. I mean, look at how many, I mean, again, I don't know how many streams and buffers are in Old Town, but I mean, those houses date back to the 60s. So again, we're continuing to limit what people can do on their properties. That's the
Sure.
thing
I
that's
mean,
getting stuck with me.
we can create a couple more options, but the basic idea being flexibility and net gain to the environment. So if the buffer is already, interrupted, there's a house already there, and you want to expand on the other side, and you're willing to do some more enhancements to your stream by planting and other things, then presumably you've improved the quality of the stream, yet you're not set with the, you can do limited additions up to 500 square feet to your home.
Right, because let me know if I'm wrong, Minnie, but we got rid of averaging. I mean, that would have been something that would have come into play here. So if we've gotten completely rid of it and we're saying, no, these are the boundaries, yet our old code used to be able to say, okay, you really want to do the expansion here, well, then you've got to average more buffer here. Well, we no longer allow averaging, so again, we're continuing to put restrictions on people and not giving them a lot of options, in my opinion. And that's been my opinion for years, so anyway.
Yeah, we can define an interrupted buffer, so it would only apply in those cases, and it would only allow a limited expansion in exchange for buffer enhancement concept. So we can flesh that out a little bit more.
Okay. Are we still 3 and 3? 3 for 1, 3 for invisible option. All right. All right, so I think, yeah, if we could come back to this one next Thursday, maybe with some more options, maybe we can get you either a majority or a unanimous.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. All right, so I think now we'll just kind of have, you know, commissioners, if you'd like to comment on anything in particular as far as the last 4 parts. I mean, if anything's tugging at your heartstrings, you'd like to comment on anything, please.
Yeah, and while you're going that, I just want to take 1 second to introduce Anne Marie Soto from Madrona Legal Team is here as well online. So if you have any questions for City Attorney, she is here to assist you with legal questions. Thanks, Anne Marie.
All right, well, I'll kick it off. I mean, this was the environmental part, and we've heard a lot of public comments, and like I said, in my opinion, people that are concerned with the environment, which is a lot of people in Issaquah, a lot of residents here, they should be very happy with the code as it's been written. I mean, we have verbiage that has been tightened, we have protections that have been enhanced, language clarified, and a much more focused code. I mean, did they get everything they wanted? No. And trust me, I didn't get everything I wanted. I mean, I think one of the few, at least for me, one of the few victories I got was the short plat was able to go from 4 to 9. And even that was a little bit of a fight. People still wanted levels of review where the state said, this is redundant. So again, I guess what I would say to residents is that they should feel pretty good about as far as their environmental code. I mean, what I've seen over this process is again, that maybe that's why I was fighting for option 3 so much, is I've seen a lot of more restrictions, more clarification. Again, that's what people, residents in this city value, and they've made that very clear. And it's also what the council wanted. So again, we're going with what they want. In some of the areas where I wish we would have had more flexibility for some development and things, I don't feel like we got, but I think the people that are concerned about the environment should be very happy with what they're seeing as far as this code, as far as I'm concerned. My 2 cents. Commissioner Issaquah.
Yeah, being one of the new commissioners and just going through the code and sitting through these sessions since September, I've actually been able to see a lot of the work that's actually got into this and actually learn from it as well, just to understand what I understand I need as a person who lives in Issaquah, but also what others need as well. And I'm pretty satisfied with what's in the actual code right now. Of course, it's not perfect. That's why it's updated every so often. But at the end of the day, I think we have to commend the planning team over here, as well as my fellow commissioners as well on this, and the commissioners that may not be here now who were before us as well. So that's my 3 cents.
Well said, Commissioner Issaquah. Any other discussions? I mean, the one thing I would like to come back, since it was brought up tonight, not only in a public comment, but a public, well, I guess it was a public comment, it was just through email, is the non-conforming use. I won't say the name because I don't know if it's appropriate or not. I should probably ask you guys that question next time before the meeting. But, you know, my concern is we have a business that has been here for 70 years, and this is my concern, and again, maybe they're looking for the same clarification that I am, is, you know, whether or not they're a great public partner, which it seems they are, I don't know if that should have any bearing on code, but I'm wondering if there's something like a special waiver, or we just need more clarification for them. It seems wrong to have a business be here for 70 years, build their infrastructure, and not have the opportunity to expand, because again, now they're non-conforming, legally non-conforming. So again, I need more understanding about what that means, because, and again, to Director Dollywell's point, maybe there's a big misunderstanding, but that was a question I had last week as well, is I'm not understanding the term legally non-conforming and what does that allow them to do on their property. I just know if they've been here for 70 years, built their infrastructure, and now they can't build out, you know, to me that doesn't seem quite right. And especially, you know, and again, I don't think there should be any particular consideration, But if it's manufacturing, to me, that tugs at my heartstring, because I'd like to see more manufacturing in Issaquah. You know, all those manufacturing jobs that never mind, shouldn't say cities' names, that some of our cities, our friendly neighbors don't want because all they want is tech. Bring your manufacturing here. But again, I don't know what type of message that sends if we're saying, well, you've been great to work with, but you can't build out, and you know. And again, I'm talking about the care and the aquifers for that particular project. But I need more information. But that one, yeah, that one concerns me, because I really don't know where we stand, and I'd like to hear a lot more before, you know, I'd like to hear more before this run ends next Thursday. Any other comments? Well, thank you all for bearing with me. I think if there's no other comments, those were really my two. Like I said, I think people should be pretty happy with what they're seeing. A lot of work went into it. We're not quite done. We have one more meeting, but you know, I feel very good about it. Again, I don't think everybody gets everything they want, but I think the people for who the environment is very important, and I bring this up because that's what tonight was about, part 8, should feel pretty good about what they're seeing. Again, just going through it. I mean, again, language tightened, everything, clarification. So I'm hopeful that other people feel the same way. And I know a lot of our public comments have mentioned that, whether it's just mentioning how this is much better than what we used to have. But yeah, no, I'm excited. I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say next Thursday when we do the up or down at the very end, possibly with amendments, and then we kind of recap over the last 2 Thursdays, tonight and last Thursday. All right, so I know everybody wants to go home, so we will move on, and I believe all we have left to do is a little bit of house cleaning, and if we can get some city council updates from staff or any other business they'd like to provide us, please go ahead. Reports.
Chair Voice, we don't have a city council report for you tonight.
Okay. Any other business or announcements from staff, commissioners? Anything for the good of the order? All right, so there is one more public hearing. That'll be next Thursday. As I mentioned, this is going to basically capture a lot of what we've discussed over the last 2 Thursdays. I believe we're going to still have a presentation. We're going to do basically quite similar. I have my notes from my conversation with Kristen the other day. So looks like we're going to be doing a little bit of through block passages, zoning maps, list of edits, and possibly a SEPA addendum. Does that sound right, Stephen? Okay, fair enough.
We'll get the full packet to the commission and discuss it with you.
Okay. And we actually will get a new agenda packet for, right, okay. Excellent. And yeah, I guess the only other news is that we are canceling February 9th.
That is correct. We took another look at the calendar and we figured the commission could use a few weeks before we start diving into the comprehensive plan and discussing housing.
Staff is very nice. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate you joining us this evening, and we will adjourn tonight at 8:50 p.m. Thank you for coming.